Thank you, everyone, for joining me for these live internet studies. I bring them to you week after week. They're an hour and a half long. There's two segments. The first part is an eschatology study where we talk about prophecy and those particular topics like Book of Revelation, Rapture, Antichrist. And the second segment is given to discussing differences between the Trinitarian perspective of the Bible and the non-Trinitarian perspective known as Biblical Unitarianism. So I encourage you to stick around for the entire hour and a half long show, which airs in its entirety in video format on like Saturday night. Later tonight is when you'll get the, I guess it's early Sunday morning for those in America. But anyway, we're now ready for eschatology, a biblical study of end-time events. If you take a look at my screen right now, you'll see that we're working our way down through these 18 different topics that are part of this ongoing study. This is what I call long form video, where I just go slowly, topic by topic, paragraph by paragraph, and so you have to kind of follow along. If you jump in at any place without starting at the beginning, I'm fine because I do a lot of recapitulation. But the point is, just know that to get the full picture, you might have to back up to like the beginning of topic 12 or something like that. That's where we're at right now. Rapture views, a final analysis, and I'm working from a limited perspective. Let me jump over to this screen. I'm working from a get the guy out of the way. I'm working from a limited list of 4 different views of the rapture that are all related to what has been termed historical premillennialism, meaning the kingdom that Jesus is going to return and set up, this 1,000-year millennium that many of us believe will be literal. Some people don't believe it's literal, meaning they believe it's kind of ongoing right now, and the 1,000 years is kind of symbolic. But I tend to be a literalist. I believe that it will be a literal 1,000 years. I have nothing to lose, I believe, by believing it's literal, even if it turns out that I'm wrong. But there are a good number of Christians and Bible interpreters and scholars that believe it's literal. And so these 4 rapture views that I'm going to just briefly describe all have a similar expectation that there's going to be a literal 1,000 years. They also all work from this understanding that there's a real 7-year time frame in the future that's going to be marked by crazy things that happen on planet Earth. Crazy weather, crazy politics, crazy religion, crazy deception, all of this building to a crescendo to, as it were, give birth to the kingdom of God, breaking into the history of humanity. So I think David Rosenthal of Zion's Hope Ministries, son of the late Marvin Rosenthal, who wrote the book, The Prewrath Objections, I think he describes it as bringing humanity to a culmination, or he talks about bring it to its proper consummation when we're talking about the end of the 70th week. So the 7-year tribulation is what some people describe. So let me just tell you the different views that I'm reviewing and tell you which one we're going to focus on tonight. So when you look in the upper left corner, get out my little markers. We've got the pre-trib rapture, with a rapture at the far left, or the beginning of the 7-year tribulation period. By contrast, they have a second coming at the very end of the 7-year period, and you can see that they've got a tribulation that occupies 3.5 years of that 7 years at the beginning, and a great tribulation that occupies 3.5 years at the very end, but all of it is considered basically God's wrath in the middle. That's their perspective. The second view, the upper right-hand corner, is the mid-tribulational rapture. As the name suggests, their rapture is in the very middle of their 7-year time frame. They still have that 3.5-year tribulation on the beginning and a great tribulation on the last 3.5 years. Their second coming is on the far end, just like the pre-trib rapture does. This time, however, their view of God's wrath is shrunk down to to only 3.5 years. So this way, they retain the theology that the pre-tribbers teach, that God will rescue his people prior to his wrath being poured out or going through the brunt of the Great Tribulation. But because they recognize that there is tribulation at the beginning of the 7 years, they see that the church is going to have to go through some difficult times. Moving along, on the lower left corner, we have the post-trib rapture, and it takes that 7-year slice. It allows for tribulation at the very beginning, the first 3.5 years. It allows for a great tribulation at the last 3.5 years. This is the classic version of post-trib. But what they do with their second coming and rapture is they see them as synonymous events at the very end of the 7 years. And in this way, the church goes through both tribulation and, at least on this chart, God's wrath. Although, I think even in the classic version, they interpret, some of them do, they interpret the Battle of Armageddon as the beginning of God's final wrath that the church does not go through, because the church is participating in Christ defeating Antichrist, riding on white horses. We're talking Revelation 19, things like that. So even the classic post-tribbers have some allowance for being excused from some parts of the wrath of God, but there's still some question, discussion, confusion as to how much do Christians go through. Again, all of these positions have weaknesses. Even the position I hold to, the pre-wrath position, is not airtight. All the positions bring some solid foundational truths to the discussion, but all of them also end up with weaknesses. So moving now to the final position, which is the pre-wrath rapture, the one in the lower right corner, and I like to give it some love and show that's the one that I hold to. We take that 7-year slice and we begin to redefine some of the periods within it. Instead of saying that first 3.5 years is tribulation, we're now labeling it the beginning of sorrows, or you could label it birth pangs. This is based on Yeshua's words in the Olivet Discourse sermons themselves. And then we still have a great tribulation that kicks off at the midpoint, just like the other three views. But our great tribulation is reduced in size because at that point in time, we have what's called the pre-wrath rapture. This rapture separates the period that is known as the Great Tribulation from the period that's known as the Day of the Lord, or God's wrath. The period known as God's wrath is the period that we Christians are excused from. And thus, in the name, pre-wrath rapture, we are actually post-trib, meaning by identification of putting the rapture after the Great Tribulation, you can see and say that the rapture is post-trib. However, it's definitely pre-wrath. So it's after the tribulation, but before the wrath of God is poured out. Where's our second coming? This is where our chart gets a little difficult for many people to follow along unless you've heard this position. We actually believe that the rapture and the second coming are part of a single event known as the second coming. So the rapture is connected to an event known as the second coming. The big difference is the rapture is an instantaneous event. The second coming is like an extended series of events that kick off with the rapture. So that's like the initiating of the event known as second coming. But the second coming includes all of God's wrath, which would be the trumpet and bowl judgments, and culminates in the Battle of Armageddon at the far end. So you can't see it on my slide, but I'm drawing a circle. Well, you can kind of see it. I'll zoom in on the slide later on. I'm drawing a circle where the Battle of Armageddon would kind of take place, which would be the culminating event of the second coming of Christ, at least the part of the second coming of Christ that ushers in the millennial kingdom. Some pre-wrathers also go on to extend the second coming of Christ to include the entire 1,000-year millennial period, and then finally include maybe that final battle of Gog and Magog at the very end of the millennium, where Satan is finally defeated once and for all. So some people say that entire 1,000 years plus this short slice of wrath is the second coming. But I don't divide against Prewrathers who hold those positions. I just myself don't picture it that way in my mind. Okay, so those are the four positions that we're working from. What we're going to be doing is continuing our look at dividing the final two positions that you see on your screen, the post-trib view on the lower left and the pre-wrath view on the lower right. And so that's where we're at in my study. What we're working from is gotquestions.org, which is a pre-trib ministry. They have critiqued all four views from their own perspective as a pre-trib outfit. They wrote this short little essay called What Are the Strengths and Weaknesses of the Post-Tribulational View of the Rapture? And so I read down through that. You can go and find that online at their website at gotquestions.org. Just do a search. Once you're on their site, they got like a little search feature. You can just type in Rapture views, and you can find all four of them. Eventually, we're going to even turn to their critique of the pre-wrath view, which I find helpful to critique other views that you don't know about or that you don't hold to. Right? Expand your this is my advice to you Bible students out there. Don't spend all of your time in an echo chamber. If I'm getting the term echo chamber correct, term I hear other people use a lot. I don't use it myself as much, so I'm not 100% sure I'm using it correctly. But I think it means this idea that you're only hearing your own the opinions that are similar to your own. Like you're listening to other teachers and other people that talk about the topic that you're interested in. But if you're only hearing the same opinion that you believe, it's like you're hearing an echo of your own opinion. Thus the phrase echo chamber. And it causes you to kind of be cut off from other opinions, and it doesn't broaden your exposure. I'm not saying you have to embrace the other opinions. I'm not saying that would work, especially in terms of theology, right? You don't have to embrace other false religions to get an understanding of the true religion. But I am saying that you need to be aware of other perspectives, because you might be blindsided one of these days by someone who holds a different opinion, and their argument, their presentation might be clever enough to kind of convince you because you weren't aware of some of what someone else is trying to say about even your own position. So, especially if you're in my position like a teacher, you've got to be aware of other positions. So, be aware of the other positions, right? That's all I'm trying to say. So gotquestions.org is doing that. They're like, hey, here's what the other guys say, and here's what we think are the strengths and weaknesses of those other guys' positions. So what I did is I created this, I'll just show you what the beginning looks like. I created this short little essay called Prewrath Objections to Posttribulationism. I'm not a post-tribber, but when I look at the other three views, I recognize the strengths and weaknesses of each view, and to the best of my understanding, my ability, where I'm at right now in my interpretation of this particular topic as a Prewrather, I find a lot of agreement with the post-trib position. And I find it has more strengths than weaknesses when compared against the other two, the remaining two, the pre-trib and the mid-trib. But at the end, I still find enough wrong with their position that I don't hold to it definitionally. I don't call myself a post-tribber. I actually call myself a Prewrather. So I wrote this short little essay. My aim is actually to lovingly try to convince those of you out there who are still post-tribbers to come on and join, to see the strengths of the Prewrath and trying to kind of see what I'm seeing in terms of, wow, we've got a lot that is so common, but the Prewrath actually takes it one step further and more sharply fine-tunes, I should say, what the post-trib already did in terms of pulling away from the weaknesses of the pre-trib and the mid-trib. The post-trib came along and said, look, pre-trib, look, mid-trib, you guys you've got some good stuff, but here's where you're missing it. Just fix those problems and you guys will be hunky-dory. And the post-trib gained a lot of popularity. It's quite a popular view, and it's got a lot of solid scholarship behind it. But then this is the beauty of the Prewrath. I should be a salesman, right? This is the beauty of the Prewrath. It picked up on that same logic of, wow, we're learning so much more as we keep studying, as the Spirit of God is carrying us along closer and closer to the final second coming. It's commonly known that God promised that we would begin to mature in our understanding and learn more and more, because God wants us to know more about his second coming. And there are certain historical events that were required to open our eyes to certain prerequisites, precursors before the second coming of Christ, namely the birth of Israel again, things like that. Israel's back in her land. She's in control of Jerusalem, etc., etc. So obviously, the view that comes the latest has a little bit of an advantage of, I'm not saying that it truly came later, but it's simply standing on the research of the positions that came before it. So in that sense, it's not new. So Prewrath has that advantage. It's like, hey, we're the 막내. That's what we say in Korean. We're the 막내. That means we're the newest kid on the block. We're the youngest. And we, in name, people don't know, they're not familiar with our position. They're just like, that's just mid-trib rehashed. No, it's not mid-trib rehashed, right? But we're not pre-trib and post-trib either. We are our own separate position with about, last time I checked, Alan Kurschner listed like about 15 different core tenets of the pre-wrath position. I'll share with you one of these days. But my point is, without belaboring, let me jump right into the study. My point is, pre-wrath follows on the heels of, if you truly want to know what God's word says, keep studying and keep reviewing what's being presented as viable options. Be convinced when you find something that seems to be what the Spirit of God is teaching you and telling you. I'm not saying don't do that. Yeah, certainly do that. But you owe it to yourself to, if you're a teacher like me, you owe it to yourself to give the other positions a serious consideration, because you might not have the right position. That's all I'm saying. Prewrath brings some pretty solid arguments to the table of discussion. If you've never given it a serious consideration, then you're missing out, right? Do you want to be someone who's just blind to some of those possibilities? So I wrote this paper, and I'm trying to convince you, hey, give it a look. You might like what you see, especially if you're a post-tribber already. Okay, so let's jump right in where I left off. There's like 5 different objections I brought. I brought number 1, post-trib confuses tribulation with God's wrath. This is not across the board. There are many post-tribbers who see tribulation and wrath as separately, but to the degree that many post-tribbers see Christians as going through a kind of a combination of tribulation and wrath, even if they think trib is from one source, wrath is from a different source, they still see Christians going through both. That leaves many verses in confusion, at least from my perspective. Number 2 we looked at last week was post-trib denies the imminent onset of wrath following the rapture. Because in the post-trib model, it's not necessary to have a separate rapture from the second coming, and then which would then initiate a wrath of God scenario. It's not necessary to have that, because if the wrath of God has been going on or all around us, then there's no need for Christians to kind of anticipate that there's going to be this moment where we are moved out of the way and God pours out his wrath on wicked humanity and on Antichrist beast system. In the post-trib model, the quote-unquote rapture or second coming doesn't so much bring an initiation of wrath down on Satan so much as it kind of brings the 70th week Imminent to a close, and it's one of its primary, the second coming. This is the post-tribbers talking. One of the primary purposes is to simply bring in the kingdom of God. Indeed, that's one of the reasons why the saints just go up and do it in this immediate U-turn and come right back down, is because it's necessary for us along with Christ to defeat Antichrist once and for all at Armageddon, right? Revelation chapter 19, and then bring in this kingdom of God. And everything just kind of happens very quick. But I see that as a weakness, because I think the Bible is a little more complicated than that. Number 3, And this is the one I spent the most time on last week, and it's where I'm going to do a little bit of summary again. Posttrib cannot explain what could be identified as the ingressive language of Revelation 6:17. I got really technical with my explanation last week. Some people got lost. I apologize. Ingressive simply means relating to that which is beginning, or having its initiation point at that stage in its development. It's starting out. That's what I mean by ingressive. In fact, if I use my little definition thing to show you, it says ingressive related to ingress, having the quality of character of entering, right, as to starting out. And so in Revelation 6:17, there's this verse that reads, for the great day of their wrath has come. This is the earth dwellers who see the sky split apart at the sixth seal of Revelation. Of the seven seals, there's seven seals, and the sixth one is where this revelation, this declaration by the earth dwellers is made. Fall on us and hide us from the wrath of the Lamb, and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who's able to stand? It's at this moment that John uses this Greek word orge, which is translated as wrath, for the first time. But interesting is that the verb choice is in what we call the aorist tense, but it also carries along this sense of, is this just starting now? Is it just initiating? That's why we say ingressive. And so that's why we spent a little bit of time getting technical with that. But in the end, here I'll go ahead and read the summary, and then we'll pick up where we left off. There's only 5 points to this short essay, so I might even finish it tonight. My summary to this particular section, let me get my little highlighter going on, was that Prewrathers argue that Revelation 6:17 signals the ingressive arrival of God's wrath. So we have it here, quote, for the great day of their wrath has come. The phrase has come is the Greek verb eilthen, and being in the aorist tense, aorist really is kind of tenseless. Technically, it doesn't carry a tense, but it can take on the flavor of the tenses around it. It's sometimes translated as a simple past because the mood that it's conveying in the Greek is simply the fact that something has happened, the surety, the unquestionable nature of the fact that something has happened, the factuality of it, not necessarily focusing on when it happened or the duration, I should say, of it. It's focusing on the fact that it did. That's why it's sometimes translated as a simple past tense, has come, has arrived. But when we say has arrived, we're noticing that there seems to be this emphasis, at least from the context of the passage there in Revelation chapter 6, that the earth dwellers did not realize if God's wrath was ongoing at that point, if the seals do, in fact, implicate that the wrath of God was ongoing. The earth dwellers didn't seem to realize it. They didn't know it. Likewise, the souls under the altar in the fifth seal seem in their request to God, hey, when are you going to pour out when are you going to pay back those who took our lives? When are you going to act, God? When are you going to take some action? And God's response seems to be, just rest a little while. I'm paraphrasing a lot of this. Just to hang on a little bit, okay? There's some more of your fellows that have to be martyred, and then I'm going to act. That seems to be the context of both their plea, God's response, and then now we have these earth dwellers saying, wow, hide us, right? It seems to be at this sixth seal that they notice the wrath of God is arriving, or has arrived. Is on its way, or has arrived. Not on its way, definitely has arrived. It's here. It's the same expectation where we know something is coming, but it isn't there yet. It's like you're waiting for a train at a train station. And then when you finally see the train pull into the station, you can say then the train has arrived, right? The train is here. The train, the beginning of being able to get on board the train has now come. But before then, you can only anticipate something that you know is on its way, but isn't there yet. That's kind of the sense of the aorist tense, and now we bring in the ingressive aspect. So I took a little bit of time to kind of recapitulate that from last week, just so for those who weren't quite following. So this idea of the ingressive arrival of God's wrath, which occurs after the cosmic disturbances of the sixth seal and prior to the trumpet and bowl judgments, is what creates a signature feature of the pre-wrath position. Some of the other positions don't treat the seals, trumpets, and bowls with a lot of granularity, meaning they don't get very detailed. The pre-wrath likes to kind of get as detailed as we can, but yet we also realize at the end of the day, we don't know the day or the hour of Christ's coming. So we are not date setting. Don't confuse our granularity, our accurate, our trying to be as accurate as possible with date setting. We don't know the day or the hour. We're confident in saying that we can only look at the characteristics of the rapture. It's something that happens post-trib, meaning it's after the Great Tribulation. It's something that happens between the sixth and seventh seals. Meaning that's in terms of sequencing, that's when it happens. It's something that cuts short the Great Tribulation, per Matthew 24. It's something that initiates the day of the Lord or God's wrath. It's something that's included with the second coming. We can only give characteristics in detail of the second coming and the resurrection, but we don't know the time. We don't know exactly when it's going to happen. We know it'll happen. At least we're quite certain it will. Again, we could be wrong, but we believe it'll happen after the midpoint, but prior to the end. That's about as close as we can get, right? We don't know any more than that. So I went on to say in my summary, this understanding hinges on the aorist verb eilthen, has come, being ingressive, marking the beginning of divine wrath. The multitude in Revelation 7:14 is said to come out of the Great Tribulation, not out of God's wrath, affirming Prewrath's view that the church escapes the wrath, right? We escape the ladder. When it comes to tribulation, we go through it. When it comes to wrath, we are excused from it, thus pre-wrath. And when John sees this big multitude, the Prewrathers believe this multitude in heaven is a combination of the raptured church, right? Remember, rapture only applies to those who are living at the time when Jesus comes back. That's what rapture includes. But those who eventually join the side of Jesus must include those who are also resurrected, which is a significantly larger group, obviously, than those who would be raptured. I'm sure you would agree. All positions must agree with the logic of what I'm saying right now. Just by the very nature of the difference between resurrection and rapture, we must agree that the resurrected group of saints is innumerable. It includes every believer from the time, well, from all of history, since there were humans on the earth. If you believe that salvation is exclusive to embracing the man Jesus Christ, whether you knew his name or not, I'm talking about Old Testament saints, or you were walking and talking when he was here on earth, first century saints, right? The apostles and the believers in the first century, or you're part of the group like me, right? We believe in Jesus who lived 2,000 years ago. We're all still part of the same church, the same group of elect, the part of the God's people, Jew and Gentile brought together under the identifier of those who are part of the bride. We're part of those who have been resurrected, and thus we're this innumerable multitude that John sees in Revelation 7:14. We Prewrathers identify that group as the bride that is standing before God's throne there, clothed in white. They've got their bodies, because from a resurrection point of view, they had to get a new body. And from a rapture point of view, we got a swapped out body. We got our bodies changed, like Paul said in First Corinthians 15:51 and First Thessalonians 4, starting about verse 13 and going down to probably 17 or so like that. So that's who this group is according to the pre-wrath. It's the recently raptured / resurrected group of believers. And that's why we believe John describes them the way he does, from every tribe, nation, tongue, language, innumerable, things like that. And so this event, chronologically in Revelation chapter 7, happens before a single trumpet judgment is pronounced. And this gives us the sequencing that we believe indicates that it is between the 6th and 7th seals, but prior to any trumpets or bowls. All right, post-tribbers, in contrast, post-tribulationists often struggle to explain this timing, sometimes treating the wrath as symbolic or what I call backloaded, occurring only at Christ's return in Revelation 19. Backloaded means, and I described this later on, but I'm just giving you this is kind of the review. I normally don't take as long on review, but because the previous one was so technical and I got some comments about people saying I wasn't following you, I decided to make the review a little bit longer. Otherwise, I would just jump right in. Backloaded meaning, yes, maybe the wrath has arrived now, but since post-tribbers, along with mid-tribbers, believe that the rapture will happen at the 7th trumpet, then the wrath was simply spoken of. It can be spoken of very earlier on. It can be spoken of all throughout the Bible. The wrath of God is spoken of as early as the Old Testament passages, right? The day of the Lord is something that goes all the way back to the Tanakh. But as to when it finally gets initiated and poured out and actuated, we say backloaded, meaning it kind of all happens at the very end. That's what I mean by backloaded. Occurring only at Christ's return in Revelation 19, is my point. Prewrathers critique this as incoherent, since if wrath only begins at the end, that's what backloaded means, begins at the end, then Revelation 6:17's declaration would be premature, right? The wrath has come, all right. And symbolic interpretations failed to account for the literal judgments described. Thus, Prewrathers contend that their framework, speaking of the post-tribbers, their framework better, try that one again. The Prewrathers contend that meaning our framework, the Prewrathers, we believe that our framework better accounts for the sequence and nature of events described. And then I had some quotes from Kurschner and Eggman, which are Prewrathers. Let's jump now into number 4. So if you're the type of person who skips forward in your using the timestamps, this is the great time to skip forward now and jump all the way to number 4. Skip past the first 30 minutes where I've been just kind of rambling about rehash, review. Now I'm into the new stuff. Point number 4, post-trib ignores the interruption of the 70th week. All right, let's read down. Remember, let me go back to here. I'm working from this idea that post-tribulation has a rapture at the far end of the 70th week. Pre-wrath rapture has a rapture that interrupts the activities of the 70th week and turns the tables on the Antichrist. And thus, it creates what we believe in the Bible is a distinction, a necessary distinction, between who has the ultimate power in that day. If Satan is allowed to reign from the beginning of the week all the way to the end of the week, this is what we Prewrathers suppose. We could be wrong in this, so don't, like I said, I wouldn't die on this hill, I wouldn't fall on my sword for it, but this is the way we see it. If Satan has the, in fact, let me go like, do I want this one? No, I want this one. If Satan has the ability, let me draw on my screen. If Satan has full reign during all of this time frame, right, which could be called God's wrath or tribulation, right? Satan is doing a bunch of stuff throughout that time, only to have Jesus come back at the far end. Hang on, let me erase something. Only to have Satan come back. Let's put that back over there. Only to have Jesus come back and shut Satan's program down. Then, basically, if God's wrath and Satan's wrath are running at the same time, it creates what we Prewrathers believe is confusion when we read verses about God being the only one who will be exalted in the day of the Lord. We can find those passages that go all the way back to the Old Testament. God himself being exalted. It seems to me as a Prewrather that one of the themes carried along by the day of the Lord, along with punishment and retribution and judgment on wickedness, one of the main themes also is for God to get the attention of the nations and wickedness in a judgment fashion, just like he did in Egypt, the people will know that I am God, meaning there's not going to be this heavy confusion to some degree of who is God. You also have to remember that Satan will declare himself as God via his puppet, Antichrist. He will sit in the temple declaring himself as God. These are Paul's words in his Thessalonian letters, particularly, I believe, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Antichrist takes his seat in the temple of God, declaring himself to be God. Of course, we know as Christians that he is not God, but the unbelieving world around us, they won't know that. They will fall headlong into this demonic deception. They will embrace him as God. Indeed, if they don't embrace him as God, he will either take off their heads or at least cut off their food supply, starve them to death, one of the two, right? Herd them up into concentration camps like the Nazis did or something. Either way, it's going to be really rough for them in a bad way if that's the case.